Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the second talk in our open source session. Very excited to make a few announcements. I need to remind auction winners that they need to go to the reception desk right away to pick up their prize, otherwise we will auction them off again. And the second thing is that we are having sprints. So the conference doesn't end today. Through this week, we're going to have sprints. It is probably an amazing time to meet developers of fantastic projects like PyPy and Mercurial and Pyramid. Amongst others, there's a chance for you to submit your own projects. So if you want to do that, if you want to lead a sprint, prepare a 20-second talk that you're going to be able to present right after the lightning talks today to get people to come to your sprint, and stick around for all of these closing messages where you're going to be able to find exciting, wonderful projects to work with some of the best Python programmers that on the planet in this city. So it is my pleasure to introduce Elena Williams, who will be talking to us about the Hitchhiker's Guide to Free and Open Source Participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to my talk, and thank you for coming. And I just want to say I'm at a real risk of running over time. And also, my slides are an experiment. I'm reacting against that fad of putting nothing on a slide, and I put everything on the slide. This might be very distracting, but I wanted the slides to be interesting for people to read them later. And there's a lot of content. I have too much content. This is a crop down from an hour-long talk. So this is me. I have no time. I'm standing in front of you because of this guy. His name is Andrew Tridgell. He's the author of the rsync shell tool and also of the Samba server, which is one of the most ubiquitously used open source projects in the world. I mean, it's probably got billions of installations and it's more than 20 years old, and it has seen it all. Every controversy, every legal battle, Samba has done it. And I knew of this guy at my university, but I thought he was like a really scary nerd. And turns out he's wonderful, he's charismatic and generous, and he donates 1 week of his life to do an autumn session to give a postgraduate level course to teach students how to participate in open source. It's the only one of its kind in the world. All of the lectures are online at the university website, and I also chucked them up to YouTube in case they disappear from the uni site. So please, if you have a deep interest in open source, check these lectures out because they have all of the examples. So this talk always has to start with beer, as what is open source? And what we're talking about is free software, but not free in terms of exchange for money. We're talking about free in the terms of freedom of speech, like free to do what you want to do. And why the term open source got involved was in 1998, Netscape Navigator was the first very serious project to release its code publicly, and because they were being eaten alive by Internet Explorer. But it was the beginning of the tech bubble, and nobody liked the idea of using the word free. So they repurposed this term open source from formerly 3-letter acronym organisations had used that term to describe a proper open source, like a publicly available source, like a newspaper or a phone book or something like that. And I do what Andrew Tridgell does. So a lot of people are really precious about these terms, but he uses them interchangeably. I will also be using them interchangeably, but when I say open source, what I mean is free software, unless I state otherwise explicitly. So free software exists because of copyright. And I hope we all have an idea as to what copyright is in that movie industry association sense. So basically, if something's copyrighted, what you're allowed to do is you can look at it. That's pretty much it. You can't do anything else to it. But the one that really matters to us is you can't change it. And that's assumed to apply automatically. You're eligible for copyright if your product is fixed or creative. There's an amazing talk about this at PyCon last year. I strongly suggest you check it out. But this makes for some really interesting copyright exceptions. So did you know fashion, dance, architectural features, recipes, automobiles, and perfumes are all exempt from copyright? They have trademarks, but no copyright. So are we covered? Our sport is very, very new. It didn't even make sense before the sort of 60s to separate hardware and software. It was only, with the Unisys that you could put on multiple bits of hardware that software was a thing in its own right. But because it's very young, Oh, we are so covered by copyright. And you also can't talk about free software without talking about this guy. And this guy, Richard Stallman, gets a very hard time for being a bit of a nut job. And I've seen him talk twice, and he is a little bit crazy, but I don't want anyone to underestimate. He is a genius. Even the people who don't like him are willing to say he's able to produce very large quantities of extremely high quality code. He won a full scholarship to Harvard to do the tough and graduated magna cum laude. He's a very, very smart guy. Andrew Tridgell had nothing but the highest praise for him. And so it took him 10 years, but he came up with this idea of this hack on top of copyright, where you could issue another license that would give away your copyright. And the first GPL was a bit sketchy, but there have been a proliferation of licenses since then. There are thankfully there's the Open Source Initiative, and there are 63 recognised licenses that have been legally tested and will stand up in a court of law that will protect your right to give your software away. But note, they've also listed 28 rejected licenses that look a lot like open source, but actually aren't. So, do you understand the difference now that open source is publicly available source, or free software is... Wait, let me illustrate this. So, did you know that the Microsoft kernel, Windows kernel, is publicly available to academics? And it pretty much always has been. So you can get the Windows kernel code and basically look at it, and analyze it if you want. But goodness gracious, don't you dare try and change that code. And if you try to sell those changes, I don't know, lawyers would drop from helicopters or something like that. So, and of another really deep in open source issue, and this is a bit dense, but if you have an deep interest, check out that lecture, because the meat and potatoes of what he's interested at his level is at what point, how much of that Windows source code would you need to change to be able to reissue a license for it yourself? And the answer is probably there is no amount of change you could make. Whereas if it's your own script, yeah, absolutely, you can license it yourself, but it's a hello world script. Could you license it? It's a grey area, and it's really messy, and if you have an interest, check out that lecture. So what this means is that if your project doesn't have a license, the author can simply turn around and sue you if they want. I mean, they won't, but they could. The other thing is, don't always use one of those official licenses, because another thing is that people, just because you're giving away your software for free doesn't mean that they can't turn around and sue you. And Andrew also, this is the first, don't write your own license. This is the first license he ever wrote, and he goes blow for blow as to all of the problems with that license, and there are a big lot of them. And just as he started teaching this course, he had been contacted by a lawyer 18 years after the fact who'd been trawling through his source code, and he had to go and open up code he'd written 20 years before and change it because a lawyer asked him to, because of a bad license decision he had made very early on in the piece. If you want to become a technical lawyer, please do. The world needs more of them, and all of these superhero lawyers come from the technical community first. If you have legal problems at the law centre, if you have a project you want legal coverage for and to be considered, have all this legal open source not-for-profit stuff covered, contact the Freedom Software Conservancy and give these people money, because these people are heroes. So, why would you want to contribute to open source? And this is the answer as to why you want to contribute to open source. But really, what we want as human beings is we want autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So this is why people learn how to play musical instruments. But more than that, to complete our lives, what we want is to feel a sense of connection. Everything we do is for this. And even psychopaths want to feel a sense of connection, but it's just misguided. And everything about us is healthier when we're connected to our fellow man. And also, we have this incredible privilege. I can't think of another discipline in which, from the comfort of your own comfort, you can directly, not through an intermediary, directly interact with the very best in your discipline. I mean, that's extraordinary. And how do you become the best? I mean, you interact with those people and you become as good as they are. Also, it kind of goes without saying that if you have an open source profile, employers will be able to know your capability, and you'll be at a significant advantage to all of your peers. And there's also this aspect of this compulsion to want to save the world. And I think you either have this or you don't. And I know this was a very big deal for Andrew, and it's something that I feel very strongly about. But it's also to be aware that within open source, not everybody is motivated by this. There will be people who don't have this strong ethical sense. They'll have their own motivations, like corporations who are essentially psychopathic. And the other thing is that we'd probably write code anyway. It's just fun. It's fun. And if we could write code and then collaborate with other people and then make things that change the world, that's extraordinary, right? So when I first gave this talk, this was my take-home message, is that all projects are different. So when you're approaching an new open source project, recognise its differences. So is it big? Is it silly? Is it serious? Is it the Linux kernel? Is it a little script? How old is it? Is it dead? Is it brand shiny new? Is it that bubbly things are really taking off part? How many people are involved? What are the roles of the people involved? What's its organisational structure like? But we are Python. I don't know if you knew this, but before I started researching this, I don't know how much of the open source world I thought Python was, but I did actually think it was more than this. But there you go. Most of the open source world, and this is 2013, early 2014 data, is Python, is C. So I reckon for Python there are actually two types of project. And fortunately I had this reinforced for me by this guy Maiko, he's a legend. And what this graph here shows is of the 265 something projects they analysed on GitHub, the vast majority of them have one contributor. Even of the 4,000 most active projects on GitHub, so many of them only have one contributor that the median number is still one of contributors for the 4,000 most active. So what this means is you've got your really famous project, you've got your Django's and your Memcache and your Pythons, but the vast majority of the projects in the world need all the help in the world, and then there's a small number that are really, really highly refined. So for your own sake, have an idea of the project before you go in. You'll have a completely different experience depending on your project. Some projects are funny. The Linux kernel, I'm looking at you, very high quality developers leave some projects because they're prone to being hostile. And so where should you find projects? This is a quote from Scud. Start where you are, use what you've got and do what you can. Because this is the question I always get asked next. And this is the true and correct answer to this question. And I'm so proud of Jessica and Ruth and Ashish for the Open Hatch project. It's amazing. But whenever I give this answer to people, it would be a bit funny. And the reason is because everyone's abilities are different. So just because you've got a PhD in computer science, it doesn't mean that you'll be, anything about software engineering or DevOps. And just because you're any of those guys, it doesn't mean you know anything about user interface. So when you're trying to find an open source project, the answer is in you. It's what your interests are and what problems you want to solve. And then the next step to finding a project is having a good sense of when you're using free software, which I trust everyone here does, and then learn to look, go beyond being a passive user. Look for details. When you find a bug, don't go, oh, it's a bug. Isolate it. Take the time to write a decent bug report. Think about what you're doing. And remember, it takes time and effort. And I think this is my second biggest message from when I started this. Is when you want to contribute to your first open source project, start small. Okay, so one of the first contributions I ever made was when I was doing this subject, actually. I was poking around in a really large old project, and I noticed that the copyright date was still of the year before. And it was May of a certain year, and I thought if anybody important had to do that, they definitely would have done it by now. So what I did, I went and I searched and I found the source code, I downloaded it, I greped for the change, I made the change, and I pushed it back up. The whole process took about 8 or 9 minutes. And that's it. That is the open source contribution process. You find the change that you want to make, you find the source code, you make the change, and then you send it back. Got that? It's like a 1, 2, 3 process. Find it, change it, return your contributions. Open source is as simple as that. So for your first contribution, also bear in mind that you're learning how to contribute to an open source project. You're not learning the skill that you're trying to do. There is no cachet in doing something that's at the edge of your ability in your first commit, because there are very serious, dedicated, professional people who can already do pretty amazing stuff in the project, who give hundreds and hundreds of hours of time to these projects. And you can't just waltz up and be a core developer. Like, you can't. There's an ecosystem. You work up the ranks. You can make plugins and integrate into the community, understand the culture. And being a cultural fit is a really big deal. Like, there are people who give a lot of code back to projects who aren't core contributors because they're not a good cultural fit. And interestingly, usually everyone's okay with that. So when you're finding projects, conference sprints, like Simon was just saying, in a few hours, listen, find things that are within your domain knowledge, work on tools that you want to use, and find people, work on things that people you know are working on. So things you can do as a programmer is the stuff that you do during the day. But also interesting things that are different is helping out on IRC and ticket triaging and code review. But there are some significant differences in the software methodologies of open source projects to closed source projects. And I believe that this is the biggest one, is that just because you submit a patch doesn't mean that it's going to get accepted. We have this incredible privilege in open source of aspiring to this perfection. Unlike work, money, resources, and time are of no object in open source projects. So we can aim for perfection. It's extraordinary. So there is a lot of criticism. So in the next version of Django that's coming out, there's a big refactor of the way the apps are loaded. By my count, this is the 5th major attempt at this. There was a Google Summer of Code project with a core developer working on it that did this fix this very problem a year ago, and that was rejected. And it was, and the one that's getting merged now was based on a lot of that work, but there's been a lot of rejections thus far. Another really big deal in open source culture, and Andrew felt very emphatically strongly about this, is to be completely and self-deprecatingly truthful to, an extreme. So your ego is just not welcome in open source. And there's this factor, which is I'm sure that people can go through their whole entire careers and never actually have to engage with anybody around them, or it's just, you are here by choice. And the more interaction you have, the longer your participation is likely to be. Another thing you can do is to ask your employer to give back some of your projects, to put an open source license on it. Some of these projects can be quite successful. Looking at you, Django. Some things you can do as a non-coder. And now this is something I thought I should say, so software development is a very new field, but essentially open source is not-for-profit, the not-for-profit version. In other older not-for-profit organisations like Médecins Sans Frontières, they recognise that 50% of the people who are involved with that organisation are not doctors. They need administrative people and logisticians and technical people, and I think that there's something in that for us. So, as a non-coder, if you are learning to program, I would strongly suggest doing code review. Look at pick a project, don't have to tell anybody, read through tickets as they come in, and you'll find that most of them are pretty dumb, like they're commas and PEP8 and that kind of thing. And then maybe eventually you will get your head around the project if you read enough patches. But also there's all of that other stuff. There's translations and content, and one of the most in-demand open source contributors in Australia is a technical writer. Okay, so next slide. I'm not talking to programmers in the room, so all the programmers block your ears. And I can say this because this is my second career, and I think there's a misconception that if somebody knows something a lot about a certain topic, that people will assume that applies to all domains of knowledge, and that's kind of not true. So I'm regularly surprised by things that I consider second nature that some really, really smart people just don't know. And the trick is, and don't tell me what, programs aren't very smart. So if you're okay, then they will be okay. So the guy who's been programming since he was 8 is not scary. He's probably kind of embarrassed about that. So if you're okay with that, he'll be okay with that. And you have every right to be here. So you be okay with that. My other advice to you, if you're a not programmer, is learn to use GitHub. I wish I could teach you how to do this now. I've got a whole other deck, but I'm very constrained by time. Learn to use a GUI, and Git has a reputation for being very complicated. Like they say you have to be a genius to learn to use it, and I reckon that's rubbish. I think all you have to do is concentrate. So when you make a mess of your repository, just take a step back, have a breather, and focus on it step by step methodically. It's not as bad as people make it out to be. So really quickly, how to project owner. Don't ask me, Carl is talking after me, so just stay in your seat and he will tell you. But from a user point of view, like I'm not a project owner per se, I'm not a core developer or anything like that. These guys have also given talks about this. Daniel Lindsley and Kenneth Wright have given fabulous talks at recent PyCons about this. But as a user, I will tell you, please let me install your project. This is the first step in contribution. I have quit an open source project because you only just kept changing it and breaking it. I'd make my time, I'd sit down to work on the project and I couldn't use it. Also, you remember my big graph about how most open source projects have only got one contributor. There's another misconception that if you make your code public, then people will just want to contribute to it, but that's just not true. Like if you want people to actually contribute to your project, first it has to be a pretty good project, but also you need to be really clear with the kind of help that you want. So also offer recognition for people who are involved. This is a really kind of personal thing, but there is a lot of rejection. But I'd say don't automatically reject things because humans, more than anything else in the world, we hate rejection. And no matter how embedded somebody's in a project or how long they've been around or confident they are, every time you get a rejection, like a little bit of you dies inside. So if you're going to reject somebody, make it okay for them. Like just say, most of the time you've got a good reason, drop them a note, say, oh, you know, we've knocked this back because someone else is working on their thing and it's a subset of that. And just do that. Don't let people just find out through an automated system. Just saying. You never know, you might have Linus Storm and von Neumann in your community and you might say something that offends their sensibilities. So just always, you know, be nice and make sure your community is nice too. But people will change, and by virtue of being in open source, like these people are obviously self-motivated and smart and creative and they're gonna move on, and that is cool. Like people should move on and project leaders should move on too. Like burnout and churn, it's a thing and it's cool, it's fine. So I'm right near the end, like I'm totally in the home straight of my talk. What I'm going to do what Anna Ravenscroft did, and I'm going to hijack my questions, which is I would love, as my first question, for somebody who isn't currently an open source participator, who hasn't made a contribution, I want them to come up to the mic like now, and first tell us if you want to, like something that you can do, like something that you're really good at, and the kind of project you'd like be interested in working on, or the kinds of things you feel have been your barrier to being involved. Oh, please. So, because I really want to hear from people who are, you know, not sure. So just some mop-up things. Please communicate. This is a massive deal in open source. It's my personal theory that 95% of human problems are caused by poor communication, and they will also be solved by good communication. And if anybody can think of problems that aren't, then I'd be really interested to hear them. Explain your problem very clearly in bold letters up the front and the middle. Don't wrap it in all this fluff. Be terse and short and get to the point. Do what you say you're going to do. This is a real temptation when you start getting involved with something like this. You want to go, oh, yeah, I'll do that. But only say that, resist that temptation unless you're already there. Also, if you do decide to do something and you're having a bit of a hard time, don't agonize. Like, everybody has gone through a developmental process, so have been at the stage that you're at. So they'll probably know, but don't feel bad about asking. And so I had this incredible privilege a few years ago working on a couple of projects with this guy, and who's by any measure like smart, right? And he was so quick to say, I don't know. Like, it was amazing. He was like, oh, you're a webby person. Oh, what's that? Like, how does that work? What are you doing there? Oh, that looks interesting. And if you're really good, you will leverage your ability to say, I don't know. And PyDanny was giving this talk, Confessions of Joe Developer, a few years ago. Please check it out. His rule of thumb, and the rule of thumb they had at NASA, is if you're stuck for half an hour, just go ask somebody. And turn up to stuff. So thank you for turning up. You guys are awesome. You're already here. But I'm not quite finished. I do have some little criticisms I will say. So if somebody takes a job in, say, Redmond or Palo Alto that you're like totally not cool with, don't backstab them. They'll probably be back. It's a really small community. You don't and make things don't be a jerk. Also, don't criticize somebody's technical solutions that are working. If somebody's running their open source project through a system of complicated Excel spreadsheets, they don't want to be doing that either. But it's currently working, and don't make it harder than it should be by giving them a hard time about that, unless you're willing to fix it. And I got this from a tweet about 1.5 years ago, maybe from somebody in this room actually, that don't criticize other projects. Save it for the proprietary world. If you've got a problem with an open source project, don't blog or tweet about it. Contact the project, make a ticket, or just don't say anything at all. And that's kind of tough with all this Heartbleed stuff, but somebody made a mad logo, you could do something like that. Very lastly, if everything does go horribly awry and you end up feeling like rubbish, come back. Take some time away, take a few years off, go do something different, but come back, you're always welcome. So nobody cares about how many times you mess up. Just, it's always so long as you come back. Also, the very last thing you can do to contribute to open source, if everything else is too much, simply say thank you. Find the project owner of the project that you love here at PyCon, or send them an email. These things always save people's lives. Like in the dark of night when you're lonely and sad, then you can always look at that and it'll save your life, and that comes from people who don't participate. So if I do have a minute, and I think I do, I personally have to say thank you to the Python Diversity Grant. I absolutely would not be standing here if it weren't for this, because obviously I have this conspicuous physical difference, and I never came to technical conferences, never ever. I was completely invisible in the shadows for, like the best part of 10 years, and I was desperate to be involved with the community, but I would never ever turn up to a technical conference. For my first Python conference, the last day of registration, I had my finger hovered over the button, and I didn't have any friends going, and I was like, no, I'm not going to go. I just don't want that feeling, like walking in, and no way. And then a couple of weeks later, I got the email for the diversity grant, and it changed my world. So I just wanted to mention that. So thank you. And thank you to these people. And I made it. So please, tell us.
Hi. It's not that I haven't made contributions to open source, but I think 2 tickets on GitHub aren't too many. One of my problems with contributing to open source is that back like 4 years ago, I tried to make a contribution and they were total jerks. That made me back off. I'm trying to come back little by little, but one of the problems that I have is that I don't know exactly what I like or what I do well.
Wow, that's a really interesting point.
I mean, in the open source community, like for my day job, I obviously have things that I do very well, but I don't know how to translate that to be useful to open source.
I don't know. What I think is that there's then the third part of that, which is people. So if you do have friends here, or new friends here, or the conference, or the sprints are coming up, often people, most of the projects I've ever been involved with have come out of conference sprints, and you just kind of hang around at the table, and tasks might fall out of it, and things that you feel confident that you can do. And obviously, by virtue of being in that environment, they want you to be there. So I don't know, that's a strategy I'd suggest, and finding communities where people aren't jerks. I'm not going to mention one of our competitors as much as I want to. Yeah, so did you have another comment? Okay, cool, thank you.
Hi, I'm pretty terrified of this whole open source thing and just getting into it. But
Yeah, welcome. I was too. I kind of still am a little bit, but it's good. It's
honestly,
fine.
like I think it's easy for me to make like typo fixes and spelling corrections, but it's hard for me to make that leap to like actually do some code. So like, what do you think could help in making that step?
Hang around. Just hang around. Keep doing typos and fixes and become familiar first. Start talking to people. Sooner or later, you'll find that you want to bite off more. It'll happen the other way around. Like naturally, your understanding of the project you're working on will increase, and it will happen to you. If you just keep hanging around, you'll end up talking to people. You'll start to understand it better just by having conversations. You won't be able to avoid it, I imagine. So, hang in there. Thank you. Yeah, and stay in the community.
Hey, thanks for the talk. It was awesome, and
Cheers.
thank you for attending. Don't not attend next time. And so GitHub projects are really easy to contribute to because GitHub's nice and everything's cool. So what about projects that aren't on GitHub? Like, have you had experience contributing to them, and how did you get over? I mean, if it's Mercurial or SVN or something, it's kind of a headache. But other than learning the tool, like, is there any easier way to start learning the tool, I would suppose?
No.
Okay.
But
Fair enough.
I mean, I will mention though, do you know how you contribute to the Linux kernel? This is absolutely spectacular. This is from one of my other talks, is they submit all their patches by email.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
So
it's they get like 30,000 emails a month. It's spectacular. So no, version control is hard. Full stop, it's a difficult problem.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Sorry.
Hi. Thanks for the talk. It's great, absolutely. You should deliver it on all the conferences you go. But it's not really a question. It's something I wanted to say, that it's really cool to hang around an open source project. As an example, we have this support channel for example, Ubuntu. And often people come there only to ask a specific question for their specific problem, but they stay around a little bit longer, and they see other people answering questions. And later on, when none of the experts are around, somebody comes and asks one of the popular questions again, and they remember the answer. So they help those people.
Yeah.
Even though they didn't really know 5 minutes before.
Yeah.
So that really works.
Yes, and that is one of the beauties of. So thank you for that comment. That's excellent. So.
Thanks for your talk, Elena.
Reinforcing cycle.
Thanks for your talk, Elena. Your passion is absolutely incredible for this, and as well as really appreciating the desire to get as much information to us as possible. That's awesome, and thank you for that. So I just had a quick question about, because the open source projects that I've observed pretty much seem to be well-honed engines. They're running, you just see everyone kind of in sync. It's like a factory. And you kind of like how do I...
a misconception.
Well, I mean, from what I've observed, maybe the open source projects I've kind of observed are a bit anomalous in that regard, but it seems like, okay, where do I insert myself? Because everyone seems to be kind of, running and rolling.
Okay, so like that thing I said at the beginning, and that's why that was one of the points I wanted to make really strongly, really early, that there are these small number of projects that are like really tight, and like exactly what you described, a lot of serious, professional, dedicated, committed people, but most projects aren't. So you have two strategies. Either you can hang around with those really big projects until you feel like you're involved enough to contribute, or be involved with one of the other ones. Like pick some really obscure thing that somebody just smashed out one night, and they probably need everything for. Like they'll be desperate for a website or some documentation or like feature filling out or something like that. So yeah, it depends on which strategy you'd prefer to employ, but there's tons of all the work that needs to be done.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to be out in the hall to chat to people more. Like, I'd love to talk to people and hear people's experiences. So thank you very much for coming.